Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the UK MOT test, and in particular we're going to be going through the checks that you can do on your bike before you take it for an MOT test so that you don't get any unexpected failures. So first of all, let's just explain what an MOT test is, because obviously they are specific to the UK, and if you're watching this from America or other European countries, then the MOT test, you're likely to have something similar where you're from, but basically in the UK it stands for the Ministry of Transport Test, which is a UK government body, and they're responsible for ensuring that motorcycles over 4 years old are tested once a year, or vehicles generally are tested once a year, once they're 4 years or older. And it's a safety check. It's to make sure that the vehicle is safe for you to ride or drive, but also safe for other people like pedestrians. And there are 16 checks or areas that are checked altogether. So all we're going to do is we're going to go through each one of those, and then you can see how you can do these tests and checks on your bike. This bike we're going to be using for these checks is my newly acquired Honda Dream 400. So this bike is 40 plus years old, and as such doesn't need an MOT, which sounds a bit strange, but once a bike or a vehicle becomes over 40 years old, the government basically suggests that if it's made it to 40 years old, it's probably been relatively well looked after, and the person that's riding or driving it is likely to ensure that it's safe. They also realise that you won't necessarily be able to get parts for some of these vehicles, and it makes it very difficult to get it through some of the tests and checks. Having said all of that, lots of people do take vehicles, particularly older motorbikes that don't require a test. They do take them once a year for an MOT, and the reason for that is because it's a fresh pair of eyes, just to check everything over and to make sure that they haven't missed anything when they've been doing their own checks, to make sure the bike is roadworthy and safe to ride. As I've recently acquired this Dream, basically the first thing I do whenever I get a bike, regardless of age, is I go through this list. I do all these checks to make sure, for my own peace of mind, that when I'm out riding it, everything's safe, done up as it should be, secured as it should be, and I'm not going to be a danger to myself or other people. Slightly bizarrely, lighting and signalling is the top reason why motorcycles fail MOTs. And generally speaking, lighting is such an easy thing to check, it does make you wonder why. So the first thing the MOT tester is going to check for are your lights. So in this case we have a side light. However, our headlight in this case doesn't seem to be working. So that would be an instant fail right there. Let's try high beam. Okay, so high beam does work, but dipped beam is not working. So from that point of view, if I took this along for an MOT test, it would immediately fail that before we even started. So this is why it's worth doing these checks before you take your bike along. Moving down the other end of the bike, our tail light is working, and we've got a white light underneath which is illuminating our number plate. Next we'll move on to the brake lights. So front brake lever, that's working. Depress the back brake light, back brake lever I should say, so that's fine. And then we can move on to indicators. So yep, front and rear left indicators working, front and rear indicators working. At this point the tester is likely to test the aim of the headlight itself as well, to make sure that the beam pattern is correct and that it's aiming in the correct place. That's probably one of the hardest things you can do to check at home. A lot of MOT stations, if it's not correct, will allow you to adjust it while you're there rather than failing you for that reason. A good rule of thumb though is if you measure to the center of your headlight from the ground, say that was 32 inches, you then place your bike 25 feet away from something like a wall or something that's a flat surface, 25 feet away with the bike level, and then you aim the top of the beam on dipped beam to be 2 inches below the measurement of the headlight from the ground. So if that measurement is 32 inches, move the bike 25 feet away from the wall. You could be your garage wall, your garage door, your house wall, whatever, on a level flat surface, and then measure or adjust the beam so it is 2 inches below whatever the measurement was of the center of the headlight from the ground. So 32, you'd move it down 2 inches. That's a rough rule of thumb, and in my whenever I've done that and I've taken it for an MOT test, it's passed without any problems. So the next area you should be checking out is steering and suspension. So we need to look at the forks, handlebars, head bearings, the swinging arm, and the shock absorbers. Okay, so I've raised the front wheel off the ground by using the stand underneath the engine, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check that our steering turns from side to side without any sign of notchiness or stiffness in the head bearings. Often, particularly on older bikes, the headstock bearings become notchy because they've either gone rusty or they've just worn, or through wear and tear riding on the road, they've become out of round if they're ball bearings. And when you turn the steering like this, you'll find that it feels notchy, or it self-centers in one place and just stays there. That's not, that would be something to look out for. That they'll test for that. Second thing you need to be looking for is loose head bearings, which you can do by grabbing hold of the front forks and pulling them backwards and forwards. And what you're looking out for is any kind of movement up in this area, in the headstock area, which again would indicate that the headstock bearings, steering bearings, need to be looked at or possibly changed out. The other thing to look for while we're here and talking about the suspension are the fork seals themselves, and whether there is any traces of fork oil on the stanchions. Again, it can be a fail if these are leaking badly. Now, what some people do is they put gaiters on here, and an MOT tester basically isn't allowed to remove anything that's on the bike to check anything else. So to get over having to change the fork seals, what some people do is they put gaiters on, and then the MOT inspector can't see that and they can't fail it because of that. The correct thing to do, of course, is if they are leaking, is to change the seals before you take it along for a test. So that will be looked for as well. If there's just a light smearing of oil, you'll like to get away with an advisory telling you that, and that they might fail soon. But if they're actually pouring with oil, then that could well be a fail. Moving around to the back of the bike, the next thing to test is the rear suspension, and the best way of doing that is when it's off the ramp, not like this, but when it's off the ramp, is just push down, up and down on the rear of the bike, so you depress the suspension. You're looking for a smooth movement, and you're looking for a damped effect when the bike comes back up. If you push it down, it bounces straight back up, and there's no damping force there. It could well be that all the oil has leaked out of the rear shock absorbers, if you've got coil shock absorbers like this, or in fact even if it's a monoshock bike as well. So again, the inspector will look for signs of oil and leaking around this area as well. At this point, you can also test the front forks by pushing up and down on the handlebars as well. And again, what you're looking for is a proper damped movement, not bottoming out, and no leaking fork seals. To test your swinging arm, then you need to grab the rear wheel and try and move it side to side and look for signs of movement in the swinging arm left to right. There should be no movement or very little movement in that left to right. Otherwise it would suggest that the bearings at the front of the swinging arm need looking at. Next up are wheels and tyres. So the things to check here are that the wheel looks true. There are no big dinks or chunks out of the wheels. They're not deformed in any way, particularly if they're like an alloy wheel like this. If it's a spoked rim, they'll be looking for loose or missing spokes, so you need to check all of those. And then when it comes to tyres, they'll be looking at the tread on the tyre and making sure that the tread is legal, which on a motorbike should be at least 1 millimetre across the entire width of the tyre. If it's down to 1 mil, I would say you shouldn't be riding that anyway. It should be a lot more than that. They'll also look at the tyres to make sure that the tyres are fit for the motorcycle, they're the correct tyres, and that there are no major chunks of rubber out of here. The rubber hasn't split, and they may advise you as to, particularly on a bike of this sort of age, if these are older tyres, they may well look at the dates to see whether the tyre is old, and they would then advise you that possibly it should be changed if that's the case. Next area to be checked is the frame and the seat. The frame will be inspected to make sure that all of the welds look in good condition, that there's no major corrosion on any of the important areas of the frame. They'll be looking for stress cracks, that type of thing, anything that could perhaps affect the suspension or the steering in particular. So there'll be a check of the actual frame itself, and then the seat needs to be secure. So the seat has to be, they'll tug at the seat, generally speaking, just to make sure the seat is securely fitted to the bike. Next area for checking is the brakes, and the tester will be looking for the hoses, make sure they're not cracked, make sure they're not leaking anywhere. They'll check the discs themselves, and most discs have a marker on them to tell you the minimum thickness. This one is 4 millimetre. They don't normally measure these, but if they think they are down to a limit, they may well check these just to test them. Then they'll also check the brake pad wear as well, to make sure that your brake pads are functional. And then normally they will actually test the brakes, possibly on a rolling road or a roller, to make sure that they do function adequately. They will check the lever and the reservoir if you've got hydraulic brakes, and of course the same applies to the rear brake round at the back. This particular bike has got a drum brake, and it's got an arrow here which tells you whether the brake shoes are worn excessively and need changing. They'll check for the tightness of pedals, etc., to make sure that everything's okay. So exhausts will need to be checked over to make sure that they're nice and tightly secured to the bike, they're fitted correctly, they're not excessively loud, there are no leaks, and everything is bolted up properly. Fuel system, they will check hoses, or you should be checking hoses to make sure they're not fractured, got cracks in them, that type of thing. No leaks of fuel anywhere, and that the petrol tap hasn't got any leaks either. Other basic checks that they'll run through is making sure your horn works, which this one does just about. They'll also be checking things like your chain guard to make sure that's secure, where there are footrests fitted. They'll be checking these to make sure these are secure and everything's as it should be. And generally just having a look around to make sure there's nothing that looks dangerous and is likely to cause any kind of harm to either yourself or to other people that you
So
might
things
come
that
into
aren't
contact
checked
with are the engine isn't checked, the clutch isn't checked, and the gearbox isn't checked, because those things, although obviously from your point of view could make the bike unrideable if there are issues with them, they're not necessarily safety issues. And let's not forget, the MOT test is all about safety of yourself and other people. That's what the test is designed for, to ensure that your bike is safe for you to ride and that you're not going to cause issues to other road users. So the 4 possible outcomes of having your bike MOT'd are: it's classed as dangerous, which means it's a direct risk to drivers or damaging the environment, meaning that it's not road legal, and because of that it's going to fail the MOT. Then there can be major issues, which means the bike must be repaired immediately, and that will also be an MOT failure. Then there are minor defects, which don't pose significant risks but should be repaired as soon as possible. Doesn't usually fail the MOT for a minor defect. And then there's advisory, which are issues that need to be monitored and acted upon when needed, and it won't fail an MOT because of those. And then obviously the final one is a pass, which means it's reached the legal standards of safety. So there we go. We've been through all of the tests and checks that an MOT tester would be going through. And if you've gone through all of those on your bike, and you found nothing wrong, or you've put right what was wrong, such as, for instance, in my case, the headlight needs a new headlight bulb, then there isn't any reason that your bike should fail an MOT. And as I say, if you've bought a bike that's new to you and it's this old and it's MOT exempt, and you wouldn't necessarily want to take it for an MOT, but you could do anyway, just for peace of mind, if you're not too sure about your own abilities to check these things. But basically, if you've followed all that checklist and you've checked all of those things out, you've basically done exactly what an MOT tester would do to make sure your bike is roadworthy and safe for both you and other road users. That should give you peace of mind that you can go out, enjoy your riding, knowing that your bike is both legal and safe to use on the road. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel, and there'll be more content coming along very soon.